Welcome, and thank you for being here. Find a comfortable position. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. Tonight, we're going to travel back to a time of great struggle, great courage, and unexpected tenderness. To the years of the Second World War, when the fate of the world hung in the balance, and when, alongside the soldiers and sailors and nurses and civilians, there were others who served. Animals. Bears and dogs, cats and horses, pigeons and ponies. They could not choose the world they were born into, and yet, in ways that still move us today, they showed up. They endured. They helped. These are their stories. Let them wash over you slowly. There is no rush. Wherever you are right now, you are safe. And the night is long. Our first story begins, as so many wartime stories do, somewhere unexpected. The year is 1943. The place, the mountains of Iran. A group of Polish soldiers, part of the Allied forces making their way westward toward the fighting in Italy, are moving through a remote pass when they encounter a small, orphaned Syrian brown bear cub. He is young. He is frightened. He is alone. The soldiers take him in. They name him Wojtek, pronounced via Wojtek, a traditional Polish name meaning happy warrior. And from that moment on, Wojtek is one of them. The men teach him to walk upright. He learns to salute. He imitates the soldiers smoking, holding unlit cigarettes between his lips with great self-importance. He wrestles playfully with the men in the evenings, and they sleep curled near him for warmth. But Wojtek is not merely a pet. The military, recognizing what he has become to the unit's morale, and facing the practical problem of transporting him across borders where civilian animals were not permitted, does something remarkable. They officially enlist him. Private Wojtek. Serial number and all. He draws official rations, receives a rank, and travels with the Polish 22nd Artillery Supply Company as a full member of the unit. And then comes the Battle of Monte Cassino, one of the most brutal engagements of the entire Italian campaign. Allied forces were trying to break through the German defensive line at a fortified monastery atop a towering hill. The fighting went on for months. The terrain was punishing. The casualties were staggering. In the chaos and the smoke, amid the thunder of artillery fire, Wojtek watched the soldiers carrying heavy wooden crates of ammunition and artillery shells between gun positions. And then, quietly, without being asked, he began to help. He carried the crates on his powerful shoulders, walking calmly between positions, back and forth, under fire. Soldiers who witnessed it said he moved with a kind of steady dignity, unbothered by the noise and the danger that had frayed so many human nerves. After the war, Wojtek lived out his days in Edinburgh Zoo, where Polish veterans would visit him and sometimes, to the bewilderment of other visitors, toss cigarettes into his enclosure, watching him happily chew on them the way they had always done together. He died in 1963. His image, a bear carrying an artillery shell, became the emblem of the unit he served. A happy warrior to the last. Not all heroes charge into danger. Some survive it. Again and again and again. The cat known as Unsinkable Sam has a story so improbable it reads like something invented, and perhaps some of it was, embellished over decades by sailors who love a good yarn. But the core of it, the remarkable stubbornness of one small black and white cat to simply refuse to drown, endures. Sam, or Oscar, as he was first called, is believed to have been aboard the German battleship Bismarck when it was sunk by the British Navy in May 1941. The Bismarck was one of the most powerful warships ever built. When it went down, over 2,000 men were lost. The British ships searching the wreckage found, floating on a board amid the oil and debris, a small cat. Remarkably calm, Reportedly, and this detail feels almost too perfect, described as angry but unharmed. He was taken aboard the British destroyer HMS Carsack. Months later, HMS Carsack was severely damaged by a torpedo. Taken to Gibraltar for repairs, she was struck again and eventually sank. Sam was rescued. He was then transferred to the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. You can probably see where this is going. Within weeks, HMS Ark Royal was torpedoed by a German submarine and sank. Rescue parties found Sam once again floating on a floating board, this time described by a report as angry but unharmed. The exact same phrase. As if the cat had simply decided that sinking was something that happened to ships, and he would simply wait for the next one. After 3 ships, the Navy quietly decided that Sam, now renamed Unsinkable Sam, had perhaps done enough active service. He was retired to land duty at the Governor-General's residence in Gibraltar, and later transferred to the Home for Sailors in Belfast. He died in 1955, peacefully. In a house. On land. Quite deliberately on land. Some stories ask us to sit with something more difficult. The story of Judy is one of those. But it is also, at its heart, a story about loyalty, and about how even in the darkest of places, a living creature can remind others that they are not alone. Judy was an English pointer, a lean, elegant dog bred for hunting, with a spotted coat and a deep sense of duty. She served aboard a British gunboat called HMS Grasshopper, stationed in the waters around China and Southeast Asia in the years before and during the Pacific War. She was the official ship's mascot, and the sailors adored her. When Japan entered the war and swept through the region with devastating speed, HMS Grasshopper was sunk. Judy survived. She swam ashore with the sailors on a small island, and in a moment that speaks to something remarkable in her instincts, she began to dig, sniffing out a freshwater spring hidden beneath the sand, potentially saving the lives of the men who had survived the sinking. But the men were eventually captured. They became prisoners of war in a Japanese camp in Sumatra. And Judy went with them. A prisoner of war camp in the Second World War, particularly a Japanese one, was a place of extreme deprivation and cruelty. Food was scarce. Disease was rampant. The men were worked to exhaustion. And into this, Judy moved like a quiet miracle. She barked to warn prisoners when guards were approaching, giving men precious seconds to hide contraband or compose themselves. When a prisoner was being beaten, she would dart in, barking and circling, distracting the guards long enough to allow the beating to stop or the man to recover. She slipped under the camp fence, how, no one ever quite figured out, and returned with food she had found in the jungle. One of the prisoners, an RAF airman named Frank Williams, formally registered Judy as a prisoner of war, apparently convincing the Japanese commandant in a state of inspiration. This gave her official status and, crucially, protection from being killed. After liberation, Judy and Frank Williams were inseparable. She traveled back to Britain with him, was awarded the Dickin Medal, the highest military honor available to an animal, and lived out her remaining years by his side in Tanzania, where he worked after the war. She was with people who loved her until the very end. She gave that same love back every day of her long and extraordinary life. Chips was not a military dog by origin. He was a family pet, a mixed-breed animal, part German Shepherd, part Husky, part Collie, living a perfectly ordinary domestic life in Pleasantville, New York, when his family donated him to the Dogs for Defense program in 1942. The program was recruiting civilian pets to serve alongside soldiers, and thousands of families made the difficult decision to give their dogs over to the war effort. Chips trained as a sentry and attack dog and was deployed to North Africa and then Italy with the 3rd Infantry Division. During the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, Chips and his handler were pinned down on a beach under heavy fire from an Italian machine gun position hidden in a pillbox, a small concrete fortification. The fire was intense. Soldiers around them were taking casualties. And then Chips pulled free of his handler. He charged the pillbox. Alone. What happened inside that fortification in the next few moments, no one can say with complete certainty. But the result was this: the machine gun fell silent. And 4 Italian soldiers came stumbling out of the pillbox with their hands raised, driven out by a dog who had decided, in the chaos and the noise and the danger, that enough was enough. Chips was slightly wounded in the engagement. He received a Silver Star and a Purple Heart, though the awards were later officially revoked by a military command that felt it improper to give combat medals to animals. The soldiers who had been there didn't much care about the official position. They knew what they had seen. Before we go any further, let us take a moment with the pigeons. It is easy, from the comfort of the present day, to forget how extraordinary the problem of communication was during the Second World War. Radios existed, but they were bulky, unreliable, easily intercepted. Telephone lines required infrastructure that did not exist on a battlefield. In moments of crisis, in the chaos of combat, information, the simple knowledge of what was happening and where, was one of the most valuable things in the world. And so they used pigeons. Thousands and thousands of homing pigeons, trained to return to their loft from anywhere within range, carrying tiny canisters strapped to their legs. Human hands would write messages in miniature and release the birds into the sky, and the birds would fly home, sometimes hundreds of miles, sometimes over open ocean, sometimes through weather that grounded aircraft, and they would arrive, and the messages would be read. Gustav was one such pigeon. And his moment came on the most important day of the entire European war. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The Allied invasion of Normandy. Thousands of ships were crossing the English Channel. Hundreds of thousands of men were about to storm the beaches of France. The operation had been planned for years. And in those early hours, radio silence was being maintained to protect the element of surprise. The world was waiting to know whether the landings had succeeded. Gustav was released from a landing craft off the coast of Normandy with a message detailing the progress of the invasion. He flew across the channel, roughly 150 miles, in under 5 hours, battling winds and weather, and arrived at his loft in England carrying one of the first confirmed reports that the landings had begun. A small bird, crossing a dark sea, carrying enormous news. Gustav received the Dickin Medal. His taxidermied form was preserved and displayed for years, a tribute to something small and determined that crossed the water when it needed to. If Gustav carried the news of history being made, then G.I. Joe saved it from being undone. Italy, October 1943. Allied forces are pushing northward through the Italian peninsula, village by village, against fierce German resistance. British troops from the 56th London Division have captured the village of Calvi-Vecchia, earlier than expected, with surprising ease. The Germans have retreated. But the Allied command does not yet know this. An airstrike has been planned and scheduled. American bombers are already in the air, en route to hit what they still believe to be an enemy-held town. The British soldiers who have just taken it, and the Italian civilians who live there, are directly in the flight path. Radio contact cannot be established in time. The bombers are minutes away. G.I. Joe is loaded with a message and released. He flies 20 miles in 20 minutes, 1 mile per minute, and arrives at the airbase just as the bombers are preparing for their final approach. The message reaches the right hands. The airstrike is aborted. Estimates suggest that up to 1,000 lives were saved, Allied soldiers and Italian civilians alike, by that single flight. G.I. Joe was awarded the Dickin Medal by the Lord Mayor of London in 1946, making him one of the few American recipients of a British military honor. He lived to the age of 18, a very long life for a pigeon, and died in 1961. 20 miles in 20 minutes. 1,000 lives. 4 pounds. Less than a bag of flour. Small enough to fit in a soldier's helmet, which is exactly where she often traveled. Smokey was a Yorkshire Terrier, tiny, bright-eyed, and energetic, found abandoned in the jungles of New Guinea in 1944. No one knew how she got there. She didn't speak any Japanese commands, suggesting she hadn't been a Japanese military dog. She was simply there, alone in the jungle, until an American soldier found her and brought her back to his unit. She was eventually adopted by Corporal William Wynne of the 5th Air Force, and from that moment the two were inseparable. Smokey was not trained for combat. But she had a particular gift. She was extremely small, she was intelligent, and she could be taught to go where humans couldn't fit. The critical moment came in the Philippines, at an airbase on the island of Luzon. Engineers needed to run communication cables under a taxiway, the paved surface where aircraft moved. To dig it up would take days and would expose workers to Japanese air attack. But there was a narrow drainage pipe running beneath it, 8 inches in diameter and 70 feet long. No human could fit. Smokey could. Corporal Wynne attached the telegraph wire to her collar. He called her name from the far end of the pipe. And Smokey, in the dark, in the dirt, in an underground tunnel with no light and no room to turn around, walked through. 70 feet. Pulling the wire as she went. Engineers later said it saved 3 days of dangerous work and potentially protected 40 men from exposure to enemy fire. After the war, Smokey became one of the first documented therapy dogs, visiting wounded soldiers in hospitals and lifting spirits wherever she went. She was celebrated, photographed, and loved deeply. She lived to the age of 14. A small dog who walked through darkness so that others wouldn't have to. The Blitz. 457 consecutive nights beginning in September 1940, the German Luftwaffe bombed London. Night after night, the air raid sirens would wail, and the city would descend into its shelters, the underground stations, the purpose-built public shelters, the cellars and the cupboards under stairs, and wait for the explosions to stop. And every morning, when the all-clear sounded, there was rubble. There were collapsed buildings. And sometimes, in the silence of the wreckage, there were people still alive, buried under bricks and timber and plaster, calling out or too injured to call at all. The men and women of the Air Raid Precautions Service, the ARP wardens, were the first responders of their time. And one of them, a warden in the East End of London, had a dog. Rip was a stray. No one knew his breed exactly. A scruffy, terrierish sort of dog who had simply appeared and been informally adopted by the warden unit. He had no formal training. No one had taught him to search. But after the first nights of bombing, something happened. Rip began to move through the rubble with a kind of urgent focus, nose to the ground, pausing, circling, and he would stop and dig, or stop and bark, at spots where, beneath the broken masonry, rescuers would find survivors. He had figured it out himself. Over the months of the Blitz, Rip is credited with helping locate dozens of people buried in bombed-out buildings across East London. He worked through the nights, through the cold, through the dust that must have burned his nose and eyes, until the finding was done. He is widely recognized as one of Britain's first search and rescue dogs, not because anyone planned it that way, but because when the world needed him to be, he simply was. He received the Dickin Medal in 1945. In the long human art of telling stories, there is a kind of image that returns again and again, the faithful creature who refuses to abandon the one they are watching over. Jet was a German shepherd, trained in Britain as a search and rescue dog, deployed to work alongside civil defense teams during the bombing of London and other cities. He was skilled and serious, well-trained and responsive. But what he did one night in London transcended training. A hotel had been hit during a bombing raid. The building had partially collapsed. Teams moved through the rubble, searching. Jet worked alongside them, scenting, searching. And then he stopped. He stopped in a particular spot in the wreckage, and he began to indicate the signals search dogs are trained to give, the low alert posture, the focused attention on a single place. His handlers investigated. They found evidence that someone was there, beneath layers of collapsed floors and broken walls. Rescue work began. But the rubble was thick. Progress was agonizingly slow. The danger of further collapse was real. Hours passed. Jet did not leave. For 12 hours, through the night and into the morning, Jet remained at that spot. His handlers tried at various points to move him, to rest him, to take him away. He would not go. He simply stayed, watching the place where he knew someone was, his presence a kind of wordless insistence that the work must continue. And after 12 hours, the rescuers broke through. They found a woman, alive. Jet received the Dickin Medal. But what stays with you is the image of the dog in the darkness and the dust, refusing to move, for 12 hours, because someone was there and someone needed to know it. There are forms of love that need no language. Let me tell you the story of a dog who had to be thrown out of an airplane. This is true. And it is perhaps the most honest starting point for a story about what it means to be brave, because bravery does not always look like eagerness. Sometimes it looks like being pushed, stumbling, landing badly, and then getting on with the job anyway. Bing, known to his family in Loughborough as Brian, was an Alsatian and Collie cross, given over to the British Army in 1944 when wartime rationing made it impossible for his owners, the Fetch family, to keep feeding a large dog. He trained at the War Dog Training School in Hertfordshire, where he was taught to sniff for hidden enemies, detect the smell of gunpowder and explosives, and move quietly through dangerous terrain. His handler was Lance Corporal Ken Bailey, and together they joined the 13th Parachute Battalion of the 6th Airborne Division. The plan was straightforward, as plans go in wartime. Bing would parachute into Normandy alongside the men on D-Day, jump into the darkness over France, and serve as their eyes and nose on the ground. On the night of June 5, 1944, as the aircraft climbed into the sky and headed south toward France, the anti-aircraft guns below opened up. Fire bloomed in the darkness. The noise was extraordinary. The men braced themselves. And when the door opened over Normandy and the soldiers began to jump, Bing, for entirely understandable reasons, refused. He pressed himself back from the opening, confused and frightened by the flak and the roar of the engines. A jumpmaster unplugged his radio equipment, gathered Bing into his arms, and tossed him out into the night. Bing's parachute opened. He drifted down through the darkness over occupied France. And then his parachute caught in the branches of a tree, and he hung there, suspended above the fields of Normandy, for 2 hours, until paratroopers found him and cut him down. He had 2 lacerations on his face, likely from German shell fragments. And then, once on the ground, once found, once the immediate chaos had settled, Bing went to work. He became the unit's early warning system, sniffing out hidden enemy soldiers and detecting mines and booby traps that could not be found by conventional means. His handlers said he would freeze in a particular way when danger was close, a full-body alertness, nose pointed forward, silent, that gave the men just enough time to respond. He served in France until September 1944, and later crossed into Germany with the battalion as the war ground toward its end. In 1947, Brian once more was reunited with the Fetch family and awarded the Dickin Medal. When he died in 1955, his form was preserved and displayed at the Imperial War Museum in Duxford, complete with his parachute harness. A statue of him now stands in Queen's Park in Loughborough, the town where he was born, a dog who had to be thrown out of an airplane, and who went on, after that inauspicious beginning, to save lives in the dark fields of France. Before the war, he was simply a family pet. His name was Khan. He was a German shepherd, living with the Railton family in Tolworth, Surrey, who offered him to the War Office in the summer of 1942 when the call went out for civilian dogs to serve with the military. He was trained to detect explosives and assigned to the 6th Battalion of the Cameronians, the Scottish Rifles, where he was paired with a handler named Lance Corporal James Muldoon. The two of them worked together through months of training and waiting, and the bond that formed between a soldier and his dog in wartime is a particular kind of closeness, forged by shared danger and the simple daily intimacy of living and moving together. Muldoon had not been given Khan, he had been assigned him. But in the months that followed, he became something closer than assigned. In November of 1944, the battalion was sent to join the assault on Walcheren Island in the Netherlands. Walcheren was a strategic prize. Its capture was essential for opening the river Scheldt to Allied shipping, which in turn was essential for supplying the drive into Germany. But taking it required crossing open water under fire, in landing craft, in the dark. On the night of November 2nd, Khan and Muldoon were together in an assault craft approaching the island. The German guns found them. The craft took a direct hit. It capsized. The men, weighted down by their battle equipment, their helmets, their packs, their weapons, were thrown into the icy water of the Scheldt estuary. Khan, lighter and unencumbered, swam to shore. And then he heard Muldoon. Jimmy Muldoon could not swim. He never had been able to. And now he was in the water, in the dark, in the cold, under shell fire, slowly being dragged under by the weight of his pack, calling out. Khan turned around. He plunged back into the water. Under heavy shelling, explosions in the water, in the air around him, he swam back out, found his handler, and dragged him by the collar of his uniform through the water and the mud and the current, hauling him toward the shore. 200 yards, through freezing water, under fire. When they reached solid ground, both of them collapsed, exhausted. Other soldiers who had witnessed what happened from the shore later insisted that Khan be formally recognized. He was awarded the Dickin Medal in March 1945, promoted to the rank of rifleman, and marched in a ceremony in his honor. After the war, Khan was returned to the Railton family in Surrey. But when they saw how inseparable he and Muldoon had become, they made a decision. They let Muldoon take him home to Scotland. Rifleman Khan spent the rest of his life in Strathavon, with the man he had pulled from the sea. Muldoon's son later said, "I have a great deal to be grateful to Khan for. There is no doubt he saved my father's life. I guess I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Khan." A bronze statue of the two of them now stands on Strathavon Common Green, a soldier and his dog, rendered in metal, facing the same direction they always faced together. There is something we cannot fully explain about the way a trained dog processes the world, the information carried in a scent, the layers of meaning in the air above a pile of rubble, the way a well-attuned nose can read what human eyes and ears cannot. Irma was a German shepherd who began her wartime service in London as a messenger dog, running between posts when telephone lines were down, carrying information through the rubble-strewn streets of a bombed city. She was intelligent and responsive, and her handler, Mrs. Margaret Griffin, recognized in her something worth developing further. Irma was trained for search and rescue during the Blitz, and she developed a skill that her fellow dogs did not have. She learned to bark differently. When she located someone buried alive beneath a collapsed building, she gave one signal. When she found someone who had not survived, she gave a different signal entirely. A slight change in pitch, in cadence, in the way she held herself over the spot. Her handlers came to trust this completely. In the chaos and the dark of a bombed street, with rescuers scratching at rubble by torchlight, the information of whether someone was alive or dead was not merely emotionally significant, it was operationally critical. Where you dug first mattered. Where you sent the limited resources of a rescue team mattered. And Irma was usually right. On one occasion, she stood over a spot and gave the signal for someone alive. Army doctors, examining the rubble, pronounced that there was no one there or that the person they had found had not survived. Irma stayed where she was. She kept signaling. The rescuers went back. They dug deeper. They found a man who, despite what the initial assessment had suggested, was still breathing. He recovered. There is another account of Irma working for 2 days continuously on the site of a collapsed building, refusing to leave a particular section of rubble, giving her a live signal over and over. Rescuers worked alongside her through the night and through the following day. On the second day, they broke through to 2 young girls who had been buried beneath the debris for the entire time. They were alive. Over the course of the Blitz, Irma is credited with helping rescue 191 people from bombed buildings. She received the Dickin Medal in 1945. Her owner, Mrs. Margaret Griffin, received the British Empire Medal for her work training dogs and working alongside them on rescue missions. They went out together into the ruined streets. And something in the way Irma understood the world, something we cannot fully name or replicate, kept finding what the darkness had hidden. Beauty was a wire-haired terrier, small, scrappy, determined, who belonged to Bill Barnett, a superintendent with the PDSA, the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals. The PDSA had organized animal rescue squads during the Blitz, teams that went out after bombing raids to find and treat the animals, pets and strays, left homeless or injured in the wreckage of East London. Beauty was not trained for anything in particular. She was simply Barnett's dog, and she went with him on his rounds because that is what his dog did. One evening in 1940, as Barnett and his team worked through the rubble of a bombed-out street, Beauty wandered a little way off from the group. Barnett noticed her behavior change, that sudden purposeful alertness that means a dog has found something with its nose. She was digging at a particular pile of masonry, her paws scrabbling, increasingly insistent. They followed her. Beneath the rubble, they found a cat. The cat was alive. Barnett watched. He thought. He paid attention to what he had seen. And he let Beauty continue to accompany him on rescue missions. And again, she found things, animals buried alive under the ruins of bombed buildings, creatures that no human eye had spotted, no human ear had heard. She found more than 60 animals over the course of the Blitz. Dogs, cats, rabbits, birds. All alive. All beneath rubble that might otherwise have been passed over. Historians who have written about search and rescue dogs in warfare trace an unbroken line of development from those early days of Beauty padding through the wreckage of East London to the highly trained teams that would later dig through collapsed buildings in peacetime disasters around the world. The techniques were refined, formalized, replicated, but the root of them lies in something accidental and very small. A terrier who smelled something alive and started to dig. Beauty received the Dickin Medal and died peacefully in 1950. The world's first rescue dog. And she was just following her nose. Every collection of true stories contains, if you look honestly, at least one story that is a little harder to pin down. The story of Rob the Collie is one of those, and it is worth telling precisely because of that complexity, because it says something true about wartime, about loyalty, and about the particular human impulse to make a good story of something we love. Rob was a black and white collie retriever, born on a farm in Shropshire in 1939. He spent his early years with the Bain family of Tetchill, helping to manage the farm in the way that working collies do, useful, attentive, devoted. In 1942, answering the War Office's call for civilian dogs to serve in the military, the Bains offered Rob. He was a star pupil at the War Dog Training School, quick to learn, responsive to commands, and he was eventually assigned to the Special Air Service. What happened next is, in the official record, remarkable. Rob served in North Africa and Italy, making, according to the citation that accompanied his Dickin Medal, over 20 parachute jumps behind enemy lines with the SAS. He became known as Britain's first paradog. He was decorated twice. His owners were told that this ordinary farm collie had become a legend. Years after the war, a different version surfaced. An officer who had served with the 2nd SS wrote in his memoirs that Rob's parachuting exploits had been invented, that the dog had served primarily as a companion to the regiment's quartermaster, and that when his owners wrote asking for him back, the soldiers who had grown attached to him conspired to keep him by writing letters embellishing his service. They had tried to actually carry out a parachute jump with Rob, but the weather was bad that day, and they sent the letter claiming success anyway. The truth is now impossible to fully recover. The men who knew it are gone. But here is what we know for certain. Rob did serve with the SAS in North Africa and Italy, in active theaters of war, for 3.5 years. Whether his jumps were 20 or 3 or none, he was there, in the heat and the dust and the danger. And the men who served alongside him loved him enough to fabricate a record rather than give him up. There is something in that worth sitting with. Not dishonesty as a flaw, but love as a force strong enough to make men do something foolish. They wanted to keep their dog. And so they made him a hero in the written record, when he had already been something simpler and more complete in the daily record of their lives. Rob went home to Shropshire after the war. He led the Wembley Parade of 32 war dogs in 1947. He died in 1952 at the age of 12, and is buried in the garden of the family farm, beneath a stone that calls him Britain's first parachute dog, which may or may not be true, but which is what the people who loved him wanted the world to know. September 1944. The Allied forces are attempting something audacious. Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation in history, has dropped thousands of paratroopers into the Netherlands, the plan being to capture a series of key bridges in a single decisive stroke and drive into Germany before winter. The final objective is a bridge over the Rhine at a town called Arnhem. The British 1st Airborne Division has landed near Arnhem and is fighting its way to the bridge. But the operation is going wrong. Intelligence failures have placed 2 SS Panzer divisions, tank units, armored and battle-hardened, directly in the path of lightly equipped paratroopers. The fighting is intense. Communications are failing. The men at Arnhem are becoming isolated, cut off from reinforcement, surrounded. They are asking for help. The question is, can the message get through? Radio equipment is failing across the operation. Messages are not reaching Allied command. The men at Arnhem are fighting in silence, as far as the outside world knows. And so they turn to the pigeons. William of Orange was a homing pigeon, one of several carried into the operation in standard-issue containers. He was released from Arnhem with a message describing the desperate situation of the troops, their position, their need, the reality of what they were facing. He flew. He flew through the chaos and the smoke and the noise of a battle that was consuming thousands of men. He flew across countryside held by the enemy, across rivers, across the open Dutch sky with its late September light. He flew 260 miles in 4 hours and 25 minutes, arriving at his loft in England with the message that allowed Allied command to understand, for the first time, what was actually happening at Arnhem. The battle at Arnhem was already, by the time the message arrived, largely decided. The British paratroopers were overwhelmed. They would fight for days more before the survivors were evacuated. Market Garden, as a whole, would fall short of its ambitions. But William of Orange's flight meant that those men were no longer invisible. Command now knew where they were, what they faced, and what they needed. What could be done was done. What could not was understood. William received the Dickon Medal. Among his keepers, he was known as a bird of exceptional speed and endurance. On his most important day, he was everything they needed. We have spoken of dogs and pigeons, of bears and cats. Let us speak now of a horse. Olga was a police horse, a bay mare who served with the Metropolitan Police in London throughout the war years. Her role was not military in the battlefield sense. She was part of the mounted patrol that helped maintain order and civil life in a city under bombardment. She carried her rider through the streets of London, night after night, during the years when the bombers came. On one particular night, Olga and her rider were on duty in a part of London that came under heavy attack. A bomb landed nearby, close enough that the blast shattered windows in the buildings around them, sending glass in sheets across the street, and the shock wave hit Olga with full force. She stumbled. She was thrown off balance. She had shrapnel wounds. She did not bolt. To understand what this means, you need to understand what it takes for a horse not to run. A horse's deepest instinct, shaped by millions of years of evolution on open plains, is to flee from something terrifying. Fire, loud noise, sudden pain. All of these trigger a response so deep it is wired into the animal's muscles before the mind has had time to form a thought. Horses trained for police work are conditioned over years to override this response, to stand when everything in their body is screaming to run. But conditioning can only go so far. There are things that can break through it. Olga was cut. She was shaken. The street was on fire around her. She stood. Her rider kept his seat. The patrol continued. And in the days and weeks that followed, Olga returned to duty as before, carrying her rider through streets that still bore the marks of what had happened, walking calmly past the rubble and the crater and the shattered glass, doing her job. She received the Dickon Medal for her conduct that night. But what stays with you is not the medal or the incident itself, so much as what it reveals about the cumulative endurance of an animal who lived in a bombed city for years, who went out into danger night after night without understanding why, and who stood firm when something inside her must have wanted desperately to run. Not all heroism happens in obvious places. Not all of it happens near a battle, or in a burning city, or in the ocean. Sometimes it happens in the mountains, in the snow, in the silence after a plane has come down in the night. The date is December 1944. An American B-17 Flying Fortress has crashed in the Cheviot Hills, the high, remote moorland on the border between England and Scotland. It has come down in terrible weather, blizzard conditions, zero visibility, deep snowdrifts, and a night so cold that the temperature was dangerous for exposed skin within minutes. 4 of the crew survived the crash. They were alive, but they were in the hills in a blizzard, in the dark, and nobody knew where they were. John Dag was a shepherd who worked the Cheviot Hills. His dog was a border collie named Sheila, a working dog, bred and trained for the hills, for managing sheep in exactly these conditions. When word spread that a plane had come down somewhere in the snow, Dag took Sheila and went out. The hills in a blizzard are a maze. The familiar landmarks disappear under white. The wind confuses direction. The ground disappears into the sky. It is a place where experienced hill men have been lost, and where aircraft wreckage can remain undiscovered for days. Sheila found the crew. Moving through conditions that would have been deeply disorienting for a human searcher, she located the 4 surviving airmen huddled in the wreckage and snow, and led rescuers to them. All 4 were brought out alive. Sheila was the first civilian dog to receive the Dickin Medal, which had until then been awarded only to dogs serving with the armed forces or civil defense organizations. The committee made an exception. It seemed right to do so. She was a shepherd's dog, doing what shepherd's dogs do in the hills, moving through the cold and the dark with her nose down and her purpose clear, finding what was lost. Let us go east now. Away from the rubble of London, away from the beaches of Normandy, away from the mountains of Italy. East, past India, into the teak forests and river valleys and monsoon jungles of Burma. The Burma campaign was unlike any other theater of the Second World War. The terrain was extraordinary, mountains rising thousands of feet, rivers that flooded without warning, jungle so thick that visibility collapsed to a few yards, and in the monsoon season, rain so heavy and constant that it was almost physically oppressive. Vehicles sank. Roads washed away. Bridges collapsed. Supply lines that would have been straightforward in any other landscape became almost impossible. The Allied forces fighting to push the Japanese out of Burma needed to move troops, supplies, artillery, bridging equipment. And in that jungle, on those tracks, with those rivers to cross, the answer was elephants. Thousands of working elephants, managed by their mahouts, the elephant handlers who had worked alongside them for years, sometimes decades, were recruited into the Burma campaign. They hauled timber to build bridges. They pulled artillery pieces through mud that would have swallowed trucks. They carried supplies across rivers that had no crossings. They built airstrips by moving earth and logs with a precision and power no machine could match in that terrain. There was a man named James Williams, known throughout Burma as Elephant Bill, who coordinated much of this effort. He had spent years before the war managing logging elephants and understood these animals as few Europeans did. Their intelligence, their individual personalities, their deep relationships with their mahouts, their particular abilities and limits. Under his guidance, the elephants became a logistical force that helped move an entire campaign. One of his most remarkable accounts describes a moment when a column of refugees, civilians fleeing the Japanese advance, many of them children, needed to cross a mountain river swollen by the monsoon. The crossing was dangerous. The water was fast and deep. The path forward seemed impossible. The elephants crossed first, standing in the current, their enormous bodies breaking the flow of the water. The refugees crossed using the elephants as a kind of living breakwater, moving upstream of them, through calmer water, to the other side. The elephants were not given medals. Their mahouts were not celebrated in the same way as decorated soldiers. But the men who fought in Burma and wrote about it afterward returned again and again to the elephants, to their patience, their power, their apparent understanding of what was needed. In a war of machines and technology and industrialized destruction, they were something older and stranger and more enduring, animals working in partnership with the people who knew them, crossing the rivers that the machines could not. Some stories do not have the shape of triumph. Some are smaller than that and more permanent. Glenn was an Alsatian, a German shepherd, who trained as a paradog with the British forces in the months before D-Day. He was Handler Private Emile Courtiel's dog, and by all accounts he loved parachuting. He had done it in training, dropped from aircraft with the harness that had been adapted from bicycle carrying equipment, and he had taken to it naturally, landing cleanly, standing still on the ground as he had been trained, waiting calmly while the noise and the rush of the world resolved itself around him. There is a line from a wartime account of Glenn that stays with the imagination, that he loved to jump. That he was enthusiastic about it in the way that some dogs are enthusiastic about swimming, or about a particular game they have learned to associate with joy. He would see the harness and his whole body would lift with the anticipation of it. On the night of June 5, 1944, the eve of D-Day, Glenn and Emile Courtiel were in an aircraft over Normandy. The anti-aircraft guns below were firing hard. The sky around the planes was loud and dangerous. And Glenn, who had always loved to jump, would not go. He pressed himself against his handler. He could feel something that training could not override. Other accounts from that night describe dogs and men who hesitated at the door, something in the animal reading the scale and intensity of what was below and understanding, in whatever way animals understand such things, that this was different from training. But they jumped. Both of them. The landing that night was catastrophic for the 9th Parachute Battalion. High winds scattered the men widely across the Norman countryside. Many landed miles from their intended drop zones. The planned objectives, including the destruction of a German artillery battery, had to be carried out by a fraction of the force that had been intended. Private Emile Courtiel and Glenn came down somewhere in that scattered landing. They were killed, not by direct enemy fire, but by Allied artillery that did not know its own soldiers were in the area. This was one of the tragedies of a night that contained many. They are buried together in the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery at Ranville in Normandy, one of the first Allied cemeteries to be established in France after D-Day. A soldier and his dog, side by side, under the quiet Norman sky. Glenn had paused at the door. Something in him had known. And then he had jumped anyway, because his handler was jumping, because that was what they did together, because the harness was on and the door was open and there was no other direction to go. There are many ways to be brave. One of them is to jump when you are afraid. Not all heroism happens in obvious places. Not all of it happens near a battle, or in a burning city, or in the ocean. Sometimes it happens in the mountains, in the snow, in the silence after a plane has come down in the night. The date is December 1944. An American B-17 Flying Fortress has crashed in the Cheviot Hills, the high, remote moorland on the border between England and Scotland. It has come down in terrible weather, blizzard conditions, zero visibility, deep snowdrifts, and a night so cold that the temperature was dangerous for exposed skin within minutes. 4 of the crew survived the crash. They were alive, but they were in the hills in a blizzard, in the dark, and nobody knew where they were. John Dagg was a shepherd who worked the Cheviot Hills. His dog was a border collie named Sheila, a working dog, bred and trained for the hills, for managing sheep in exactly these conditions. When word spread that a plane had come down somewhere in the snow, Dagg took Sheila and went out. The hills in a blizzard are a maze. The familiar landmarks disappear under white. The wind confuses direction. The ground disappears into the sky. It is a place where experienced hill men have been lost, and where aircraft wreckage can remain undiscovered for days. Sheila found the crew. Moving through conditions that would have been deeply disorienting for a human searcher, she located the 4 surviving airmen huddled in the wreckage and snow, and led rescuers to them. All 4 were brought out alive. Sheila was the first civilian dog to receive the Dickin Medal, which had until then been awarded only to dogs serving with the armed forces or civil defense organizations. The committee made an exception. It seemed right to do so. She was a shepherd's dog, doing what shepherd's dogs do in the hills, moving through the cold and the dark with her nose down and her purpose clear, finding what was lost. Let us go east now. Away from the rubble of London, away from the beaches of Normandy, away from the mountains of Italy. East, past India, into the teak forests and river valleys and monsoon jungles of Burma. The Burma campaign was unlike any other theater of the Second World War. The terrain was extraordinary, mountains rising thousands of feet, rivers that flooded without warning, jungle so thick that visibility collapsed to a few yards, and in the monsoon season, rain so heavy and constant that it was almost physically oppressive. Vehicles sank. Roads washed away. Bridges collapsed. Supply lines that would have been straightforward in any other landscape became almost impossible. The Allied forces fighting to push the Japanese out of Burma needed to move troops, supplies, artillery, bridging equipment. And in that jungle, on those tracks, with those rivers to cross, the answer was elephants. Thousands of working elephants, managed by their mahouts, the elephant handlers who had worked alongside them for years, sometimes decades, were recruited into the Burma campaign. They hauled timber to build bridges. They pulled artillery pieces through mud that would have swallowed trucks. They carried supplies across rivers that had no crossings. They built airstrips by moving earth and logs with a precision and power no machine could match in that terrain. There was a man named James Williams, known throughout Burma as Elephant Bill, who coordinated much of this effort. He had spent years before the war managing logging elephants and understood these animals as few Europeans did. Their intelligence, their individual personalities, their deep relationships with their mahouts, their particular abilities and limits. Under his guidance, the elephants became a logistical force that helped move an entire campaign. One of his most remarkable accounts describes a moment when a column of refugees, civilians fleeing the Japanese advance, many of them children, needed to cross a mountain river swollen by the monsoon. The crossing was dangerous. The water was fast and deep. The path forward seemed impossible. The elephants crossed first, standing in the current, their enormous bodies breaking the flow of the water. The refugees crossed using the elephants as a kind of living breakwater, moving upstream of them, through calmer water, to the other side. The elephants were not given medals. Their mahouts were not celebrated in the same way as decorated soldiers. But the men who fought in Burma and wrote about it afterward returned again and again to the elephants, to their patience, their power, their apparent understanding of what was needed. In a war of machines and technology and industrialized destruction, they were something older and stranger and more enduring, animals working in partnership with the people who knew them, crossing the rivers that the machines could not. Some stories do not have the shape of triumph. Some are smaller than that and more permanent. Glenn was an Alsatian, a German shepherd, who trained as a paradog with the British forces in the months before D-Day. He was Handler Private Emile Courtiel's dog, and by all accounts he loved parachuting. He had done it in training, dropped from aircraft with the harness that had been adapted from bicycle carrying equipment, and he had taken to it naturally, landing cleanly, standing still on the ground as he had been trained, waiting calmly while the noise and the rush of the world resolved itself around him. There is a line from a wartime account of Glenn that stays with the imagination, that he loved to jump. That he was enthusiastic about it in the way that some dogs are enthusiastic about swimming, or about a particular game they have learned to associate with joy. He would see the harness and his whole body would lift with the anticipation of it. On the night of June 5, 1944, the eve of D-Day, Glenn and Emile Courtiel were in an aircraft over Normandy. The anti-aircraft guns below were firing hard. The sky around the planes was loud and dangerous. And Glenn, who had always loved to jump, would not go. He pressed himself against his handler. He could feel something that training could not override. Other accounts from that night describe dogs and men who hesitated at the door, something in the animal reading the scale and intensity of what was below and understanding, in whatever way animals understand such things, that this was different from training. But they jumped. Both of them. The landing that night was catastrophic for the 9th Parachute Battalion. High winds scattered the men widely across the Norman countryside. Many landed miles from their intended drop zones. The planned objectives, including the destruction of a German artillery battery, had to be carried out by a fraction of the force that had been intended. Private Emile Courtiel and Glenn came down somewhere in that scattered landing. They were killed, not by direct enemy fire, but by Allied artillery that did not know its own soldiers were in the area. This was one of the tragedies of a night that contained many. They are buried together in the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery at Ranville in Normandy, one of the first Allied cemeteries to be established in France after D-Day. A soldier and his dog, side by side, under the quiet Norman sky. Glenn had paused at the door. Something in him had known. And then he had jumped anyway, because his handler was jumping, because that was what they did together, because the harness was on and the door was open and there was no other direction to go. There are many ways to be brave. One of them is to jump when you are afraid. Her name was Winky. She was a blue-checkered hen, small and unremarkable, lent to the Royal Air Force Pigeon Service by her owner, a man named George Ross, who kept a loft in Broughty Ferry, near Dundee, on the eastern coast of Scotland. On the 23rd of February, 1942, Winky was loaded into a canister aboard a Bristol Beaufort bomber, Beaufort L-9965 of No. 42 Squadron, which set out from RAF Leuchars on a reconnaissance sweep off the Norwegian coast. 4 men were aboard: Squadron Leader Headley Cliff, Navigator MacDonald, Air Gunner Venn, and Flying Officer Tessier. The mission did not go as planned. On the return flight, the port engine suddenly exploded. Flying at only 500 feet, there was almost no time. The Beaufort ditched into the freezing North Sea. The crew dragged themselves onto a rubber dinghy. The radio had sent only a weak, unlocated SOS. Sergeant Venn remembered the pigeons. He reached for the canister, and in the struggle to open it, Winky escaped. No message was attached to her leg. She flew into the grey sky above an uncharted stretch of sea, covered in oil from the crash, buffeted by wind. She flew home anyway. 120 miles. In the dark. Through bad weather. Exhausted and oiled. When George Ross found her in the loft the next morning, he knew something was wrong. He contacted RAF Leuchars immediately. And now came an extraordinary piece of detective work, using the time Winky had left the downed aircraft, the time she arrived home, the wind direction, and the drag that oil would have caused on her flight speed. The AF calculated approximately where the plane had gone down. A Hudson from 320 Squadron was dispatched. The dinghy was found. All 4 men were pulled alive from the North Sea. Winky had no message. She carried nothing but herself. And that was enough. On the 2nd of December, 1943, she became one of the very first recipients of the newly created Dickin Medal, the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross. The RAF crew held a dinner in her honor. She sat in her cage at the table while the men raised their glasses to her. She blinked steadily, as she always did, which is why they had named her Winky in the first place. Less than 2 years after Winky's rescue, history would almost repeat itself, this time off the coast of the Hebrides, in even worse weather. It was the 11th of October, 1943. A Catalina flying boat from No. 190 Squadron RAF had been forced to ditch in the sea near the Scottish Islands. The radio was out of action. Bad weather and thick mist had grounded all search aircraft. The 11 crew members were in the water, drifting. Their only hope was a pigeon named White Vision. She had been bred by the Fleming brothers of Motherwell, Lanarkshire, and lent to the National Pigeon Service. She was aboard the Catalina when it went down. When her canister was opened, she rose into a sky that offered her no kindness: strong headwinds, rain, poor visibility. She flew 60 miles against that wind and found her loft. The message she carried allowed the search to resume. The crew was found. All 11 of them, after spending 18 hours in the sea, were rescued alive. White Vision received the Dickin Medal that same December, alongside Winky and a third pigeon called Tyke, at the very first Dickin Medal ceremony. She and Winky and Tyke stood at the beginning of a long line of honored animals, a line that would grow over decades and conflicts to come. 3 small birds. 3 rescues. A ceremony in winter. The start of something. Robert Wojtek was a Czech airman who had escaped the Nazi occupation of his homeland and found his way to the French Air Force. In the winter of 1939, during the Phoney War, his aircraft was shot down over the no-man's land between French and German lines. He took shelter in an abandoned farmhouse. And there, in the kitchen, thin and shivering, was a German shepherd puppy. Robert could not leave it behind. He named the dog Antis, after the Russian ANT dive bomber that Czech airmen admired. And from that moment, their lives became inextricably bound. Together they fled France as it fell, sneaking onto ships, hiding in holds, swimming between vessels when no other passage was allowed. They arrived in England. Robert joined the Royal Air Force, transferring eventually to 311 Czech Bomber Squadron flying Wellingtons over occupied Europe. Antis came too. Strictly against regulations. The crew knew. No one said a word. On the nights Robert flew, Antis would wait by the runway. He would not eat. He would not sleep. He simply waited, his eyes on the dark sky, until he heard the sound of engines returning. Then and only then would he allow himself to be taken inside. When Robert was hospitalized after one mission, Antis spent days in the rain by the runway, refusing to leave. The dog flew on more than 30 combat missions, crouching at Robert's feet in the cramped fuselage while anti-aircraft fire burst around them. He was wounded twice by shrapnel. Both times he made no sound. Both times Robert only discovered the injuries on landing. During a Luftwaffe raid on Liverpool, when Robert threw himself flat on the pavement to shelter, Antis led him and his friends through the rubble to 6 trapped survivors, digging and sniffing until every one of them was found. After the war, Robert returned to Czechoslovakia, and then had to flee again, this time from the communist regime that marked him as a suspect for his RAF service. He escaped across a border at night, on foot, with Antis beside him. The dog alerted him to a hidden border guard, allowing them both to slip through. In 1949, Field Marshal Lord Wovell pinned the Dickin Medal to Antis's collar. He was the first non-British animal to receive it. Lord Wovell looked at the dog and said, "You have been in action a great many times. You have been wounded. And you have inspired others by your courage and steadfastness on many occasions." Antis died in 1953. Robert never owned another dog. He began his life as a family pet named Powell, living with the Hayden family in the town of Gander, Newfoundland, on the eastern coast of Canada. He was a Newfoundland dog, a breed known for its immense size, its gentle nature, and its instinct to protect. When Pal accidentally scratched a child's face while playing, his family faced a difficult choice. Rather than have him put down, they gave him to the soldiers stationed at the nearby Gander Airport. The Royal Rifles of Canada adopted him with great enthusiasm, renamed him Gander after the town, and promoted him to the rank of sergeant. In October 1941, the regiment shipped out to Hong Kong. Gander went with them. He wore sergeant's stripes on his collar and slept among the men. On the 8th of December, 1941, one day after Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces attacked Hong Kong. The Canadians and their allies were outnumbered 3-1. The fighting was desperate. On 3 documented occasions, Gander placed himself between the enemy and his men. Twice, he charged at advancing Japanese soldiers, barking, snarling, driving them back, protecting groups of wounded Canadians who lay unable to move. The third time, a grenade landed among a group of soldiers. Gander picked it up in his mouth and ran. He ran away from his men. The grenade exploded. The men he had protected survived. Gander did not. Hong Kong fell on Christmas Day, 1941. The surviving Canadian soldiers were taken as prisoners of war. But they never forgot Gander. In Japanese interrogations about a mysterious black beast that had fought alongside the Canadians, the prisoners said nothing, letting their captors wonder what kind of weapon Canada had deployed. In the year 2000, 59 years after his death, Gander was posthumously awarded the Dickin Medal. When the Hong Kong Veterans Memorial Wall was unveiled in Ottawa, the survivors insisted that his name be placed among the 1,977 Canadians listed there. He is the only animal on that wall. On the 6th of June, 1944, as tens of thousands of Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, hundreds of carrier pigeons were lifted from their crates and sent skyward into the wind. Radio communications were jammed. Radio silence was required. Pigeons were, in those frantic hours, among the most reliable messengers in the world. 30 of those birds had been assigned to the U.S. First Army, landing at Omaha and Utah beaches. One of them was a blue-checkered cock from County Antrim in Northern Ireland, service number NPS.43.9451. His name was Paddy. He had been bred and trained by a pigeon fancier named Andrew Hughes in the village of Carnlaw. On the 12th of June, 6 days into the invasion, Paddy was released at 8:15 in the morning, carrying a canister of coded intelligence about the Allied advance. He was the last of the 30 American pigeons to be sent up from the Normandy beaches. He was the first to arrive home. He flew 230 miles across the English Channel, through questionable weather, through skies in which German forces had trained hawks to intercept exactly such birds, and landed at his loft in Hampshire in 4 hours and 50 minutes. It was the fastest recorded crossing by a carrier pigeon during the Normandy operations. On the 1st of September, 1944, Paddy was awarded the Dickin Medal. He remains, to this day, the only recipient of the medal from Ireland. His story inspired a plaque in his home village of Carnlaw, where the community still honors him. He lived another 10 years after the war, retiring to County Antrim with his breeder. He died in 1954 at the age of 11. A racing bird, born in peacetime, carrying the weight of history on his small, swift wings. Charlie Brewer was a bootmaker in Exeter, a quiet craftsman who spent his days stitching leather and his evenings tending to his pigeons in the loft above his workshop on West Street. When war came, he enrolled his finest bird, a hen he called Mary of Exeter, in the National Pigeon Service. Her job was to carry coded intelligence across the English Channel, flying from agents in occupied France back to England. Mary made 4 such flights. She came back from every one of them. The first time, she returned with deep wounds to her neck and breast. She had been attacked by German hawks, trained peregrine falcons stationed along the French coast specifically to intercept British carrier pigeons. Charlie cleaned her injuries and stitched her wounds himself, using the needle and thread of his trade. She recovered. She flew again. The second time, she came back with part of a wing shot away and 3 pellets embedded in her body. Charlie removed the pellets and sewed her wounds again. She recovered. She flew again. The third time, she returned with shrapnel injuries so severe to her neck that she could barely hold her head up. Charlie made her a small leather collar, cut from his boot-making supplies, to support her neck while she healed. Altogether, Mary of Exeter received 22 stitches over the course of her service. In proportion to her small body, that is the equivalent of thousands of stitches on a full-grown person. She recovered. She flew again. And while she was resting from her final injury, the Luftwaffe bombed her loft. Many of Charlie's other birds were killed. Mary survived. In 1945, she was awarded the Dickin Medal for outstanding endurance on war service in spite of wounds. At the end of the war, both Mary and Charlie received medals, his for his civil service, hers for something harder to name. Mary died in 1950 and is buried in the PDSA Animal Cemetery in Ilford, with other heroes of her kind. At her side, a small note about a cobbler who stitched her back together again and again and sent her back into the sky. There is a kind of quiet heroism in repetition. Not the single brave moment that blazes and is gone, but the steady, patient return to danger. The willingness to go again and again and again. Commando was a red-checkered cock pigeon, bred in Haywards Heath, Sussex, by a man named Sid Moon, himself a veteran of the Army Pigeon Service in the First World War. When the Second World War began, Sid offered his birds to the effort. Commando was among them. He flew more than 90 missions. Most were secret. Pigeons were parachuted into occupied France in small containers collected by members of the French resistance and used to carry intelligence back to England, the location of German troops, details about munitions factories, reports on Allied soldiers who had been shot down and were in hiding. Radio transmitters could be traced. A pigeon could not. In June, August, and September of 1942, Commando completed 3 missions of particular importance, twice under conditions that were described as exceptionally adverse, conditions that would have grounded lesser birds. He was awarded the Dickin Medal in April 1945, presented by Rear Admiral Bellairs at a ceremony in London. After the war, Sid Moon bought Commando back from military service and brought him home to Sussex. Commando lived out his retirement as something of a celebrity, visited and photographed and spoken of with the kind of warm reverence usually reserved for people. He had earned it. 90 missions. 90 times into the dark. In early December 1944, on the banks of the Nudevaart Canal in the Netherlands, a Welsh collie named Ricky was working alongside his handler, Corporal Maurice Yielding, of the 279th Field Company, 15th Scottish Infantry Division. Their task was to clear mines from the canal verges. 16 types of anti-tank mine. 10 types of anti-personnel mine. Multiple booby traps, hidden in mud, gravel, and undergrowth. Ricky moved carefully, nose to the earth, finding them one by one. Then the section commander, standing just a meter from Ricky, accidentally triggered a mine. The explosion was violent. The section commander was killed. Shrapnel struck Ricky in the head, tearing wounds along his skull. Ricky did not run. He did not panic. He did not bolt or flinch or pull toward safety. He kept working. Maurice Yielding said later, Ricky was steady as the Rock of Gibraltar. And I think it was his coolness that brought us out of a sticky patch safely. Had Ricky panicked, had he bolted through that minefield, scrambling to escape, he would almost certainly have triggered further devices, killing or maiming the men around him. His stillness, in the immediate aftermath of an explosion, in pain, surrounded by hidden death, was itself an act of protection. He was awarded the Dickin Medal on the 29th of March, 1947. His citation read, "He found all the mines. During the operation, one of them exploded. Ricky was wounded in the head but remained calm and kept at work. Had he become excited, he would have been a danger to the rest of the section working nearby." Ricky, steady as the Rock of Gibraltar. Somewhere in the western desert of North Africa, in 1941, a small black terrier of uncertain Egyptian ancestry attached herself to the soldiers of the 1st Battalion, King's Royal Rifle Corps. No one is quite sure how she arrived. She was simply there one day, scrappy and alert and utterly unafraid, and the men decided she belonged to them. They named her Titch. They called her the Desert Rat. In 1943, as the battalion moved through North Africa toward Algiers and then onto the Italian campaign, Titch came into the care of Rifleman Thomas Walker, a medic, a gentleman, a devoted soldier. She rode on the bonnet of his jeep. In shelling and smoke and confusion, she refused to leave her post. In Italy, Walker's regimental aid post came under heavy artillery fire. He evacuated the wounded, every one of them, soldiers and Titch alike. He was later awarded the military medal for his actions that day. The battalion's commanding officer wrote of Titch, "Her courage and devotion to duty were of very real and considerable value. Her courageous example materially helped many men to keep their heads and sense of proportion in times of extreme danger." The sight of her put heart in the men, as she habitually rode on the bonnet of her master's jeep and refused to leave her post even when bringing in wounded under heavy fire. The battalion chaplain added a more surprising note, that Titch had learned to howl on command, to stand against a wall until given leave to move, and, remarkably, to smoke cigarettes, though she would not eat or drink until instructed by her owner. In September 1949, before 8,000 people at an animals rally at Wembley, Titch was awarded the Dickin Medal. She was probably 9 years old. She and Thomas Walker retired to Newcastle, raised funds for animal charities together, and lived in comfortable, devoted partnership until her death in 1959 at the remarkable age of nearly 20. Of all the animals awarded the Dickin Medal, Regal the police horse was recognized not for a single dramatic act, but for something quieter and perhaps more telling, the capacity to endure fear, twice, and emerge without losing trust in the humans around him. Regal was stationed with the Metropolitan Police at Muswell Hill in North London. During the bombing raids of the early 1940s, incendiary bombs fell on the area and set the stables ablaze. Regal was inside. He was brought out. He had minor injuries. He recovered. 3 years later, in July 1944, a V-1 flying bomb, one of Hitler's new terror weapons, struck nearby. The explosion partially collapsed the station roof. Debris fell on Regal and wounded him again. Twice in burning or shattered stables. Twice wounded. Not once did he bolt in a way that endangered those around him or refused the hands that steadied him. In April 1947, along with his fellow police horses Olga and Upstart, Regal received the Dickin Medal at Regent's Park in London. The three horses stood together in the sunshine, their riders proud, and for a moment London stopped to honor its quietest wartime servants. Regal, Olga, and Upstart are buried together at the Metropolitan Police Mounted Training Establishment at Thames Ditton. Their medals are displayed there. His name was Upstart, and he was a chestnut gelding who served with the Metropolitan Police of London through the long years of German bombardment. He had begun his wartime posting near Hyde Park, but his stable there was damaged by enemy gunfire from an attack on a nearby anti-aircraft position. He was relocated to Bethnal Green in the East End of London, one of the hardest-hit parts of the city. One morning, Upstart was on patrol with his rider, Detective Inspector Morley, when a flying bomb exploded less than 75 yards away. Glass and shrapnel rained down on both horse and rider. The blast shook the street. Buildings groaned. People screamed. Upstart did not move. He stood completely still among the glass and the dust, and waited for his rider to direct him. Then they went to work, controlling traffic, keeping the growing crowd of onlookers back, making space for the rescue teams. The citation on his Dickin medal read, "Upstart was completely unperturbed and remained quietly on duty with his rider controlling traffic until the incident had been dealt with." Unperturbed. That single word says everything. Around him, the world had broken open. And Upstart stood in the middle of it, waiting, patient, ready to serve. Not all of the animals who received the Dickin medal worked in the Blitz rubble searching for the buried. Some worked in burning buildings, in conditions that would drive most creatures, most people, away. Rex was an Alsatian who served with London Civil Defence during the war and, in the years immediately after, with the Metropolitan Auxiliary Police. He was awarded the Dickin Medal in April 1945 for what his citation described as outstanding work in locating casualties in burning buildings, work that required him to move through smoldering debris and thick smoke and jets of water from fire hoses without flinching, following the faintest trace of a human sent deeper into the fire. Dogs do not understand fire the way we understand it. But they understand the pull towards someone who needs them. That instinct, that wordless reaching toward a life in distress, is perhaps the oldest partnership in human history. Rex followed it into the smoke again and again. He was trained, yes. But no training teaches a creature to override fear entirely. That comes from somewhere deeper. He is buried in the PDSA Animal Cemetery at Ilford, with his medal and his record, among the others who served. To qualify as a British paratrooper, a soldier must complete a prescribed number of jumps and demonstrate readiness to operate behind enemy lines. Brian the Alsatian did all of this. He was attached to the 13th Parachute Battalion of the 6th Airborne Division, part of the same D-Day airborne force that included the famous parachuting dog Bing, who we met in a previous volume. Brian had trained extensively for his role as a patrol dog, and he had completed the requisite number of jumps to earn official paratrooper status. On the night of the 5th to 6th of June, 1944, Brian jumped into Normandy alongside his battalion. The landing was scattered, as most airborne landings were that night. Men and dogs and equipment spread across moonlit fields and hedgerows, gradually finding one another in the dark. Brian worked with his battalion through the Normandy campaign as a patrol dog, moving silently at the front, alerting his handlers to hidden dangers, using his nose to sense what human eyes could not see. His Dickin Medal citation, awarded in March 1947, acknowledged simply that he landed in Normandy with his parachute battalion and, having done the requisite number of jumps, became a fully qualified paratrooper. A qualified paratrooper. In an army of men who knew what it took to earn that title, the dog among them was treated as an equal. Among the many search and rescue dogs who worked in London during and after the Blitz, one of the most consistently cited was Peter, an Alsatian attached to the Ministry of Aircraft Production, working alongside the Civil Defence of London. His Dickin Medal, awarded in 1945, read, "For locating victims trapped under blitzed buildings while serving with the map attached to Civil Defence of London." Peter's work was the same as Rip's, as Irma's and Beauty's and Jet's, but he came at it fresh, with a different handler, working a different patch of London's vast bomb damage. The city was enormous, the damage incomprehensible. One dog could not cover it all. They needed many. What strikes us, looking back at these search dogs, is not any single act of heroism but the cumulative quiet courage of the thing, day after day, night after night, going out into the rubble. The city broken and smoking. The dogs moving through it with their noses down. Peter was one thread in that tapestry. Not the only one. Not the last. But a thread. We have spoken of Winky and of White Vision. The third pigeon to receive the Dickin Medal on that inaugural day in December 1943 was Tyke, also a homing pigeon who had served with the RAF and contributed to the rescue of a downed aircrew. 3 birds. 3 rescues. 3 occasions on which a small animal, released into hostile skies, found its way home and in doing so brought others home too. Tyke's specific mission is less extensively documented than Winky's. History sometimes keeps one story and lets another fade, even when both deserve equal light. But he stood at that ceremony alongside his fellows, and Maria Dickin herself placed the medal. Together, Winky, White Vision, and Tyke represent something that would echo through the coming years. The idea that devotion to duty does not require understanding of duty. That courage does not require knowledge of what courage means. That a small creature, doing the one thing it knows how to do, can save a life. Fly home. That was all. Fly home. Among the many pigeons to receive the Dickin Medal, one had a particularly distinguished provenance. Royal Blue was bred at the Royal Lofts at Sandringham, the loft belonging to His Majesty King George VI himself. He was designated NURP.40 at GVS.453, and during the Second World War he was lent to the RAF Pigeon Service. On the 10th of October, 1940, during the Battle of Britain, a force-landed Allied aircraft on the European continent needed to get a message back to England. Royal Blue was released in Holland. He flew 120 miles in 4 hours and 10 minutes. He was the first pigeon to carry a message from an Allied aircraft that had force-landed on the continent during the war, a distinction that made him, in a quiet way, a pioneer as much as a hero. He received the Dickin Medal in April 1945, at the same ceremony as Commando, presented by Rear Admiral Bellairs in London. A pigeon who had flown from a king's loft to deliver the very first message of its kind. Operation Columba was one of the stranger and more remarkable intelligence operations of the Second World War. Beginning in 1941, the British Special Operations Executive began dropping carrier pigeons by parachute into occupied France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The pigeons were packed in small cardboard boxes, each containing a questionnaire and instructions in the relevant language, asking local civilians to record whatever they knew of German troop movements, weapons installations, airfields, or anything else that might help the Allied cause. The boxes drifted down into occupied fields and farmyards. Most were found by people too frightened to respond. Some were found by German soldiers. Others were reported to the authorities. But some were found by farmers and shopkeepers and teachers and priests who carefully filled out the questionnaire, sealed the canister to the pigeon's leg, and released the bird into the sky. Over the course of the war, more than 16,000 pigeons were parachuted into occupied Europe. Perhaps 1 in 10 made it back. Those that did brought intelligence of genuine value, including, on several occasions, Information that saved Allied lives and guided military planning. The birds themselves understood none of this. They simply flew home. And the people who sent them, those anonymous figures standing in French fields or Belgian barns, releasing a small bird into the sky at the risk of their own lives, they are perhaps the truest heroes in this story. In a previous volume we told the story of Irma, the German shepherd who worked through the London Blitz with her owner Mrs. Margaret Griffin, locating survivors in the rubble with a distinctive signal: flat ears for the dead, frantic scratching for the living. But Irma was not always alone. Mrs. Griffin also worked with a second dog, Crumbstone Psyche, another German shepherd, trained to the same task. Together, Irma and Psyche and their devoted owner covered the devastated streets of London throughout the bombing campaigns. Where Irma was the more celebrated dog, the one who received the Dickin Medal, Psyche was her constant companion and colleague, working the same rubble, following the same invisible trails of scent through the dark. Between the two dogs and Mrs. Griffin, the team located a total of 233 people beneath the wreckage of bombed buildings, 21 of them still alive. 21 people who would not otherwise have been found in time. Irma received the medal. Psyche worked beside her. In the quiet arithmetic of rescue work, both made the numbers possible. This is a story from 1946, after the formal end of the war, when British forces were still deployed across what had been the battlefields and occupied territories of the world. In the British Mandate of Palestine, two dogs named Punch and Judy, both boxer dogs, were serving with British officers when an armed intruder crept toward their sleeping handlers in the night. Punch and Judy attacked the intruder before he reached the officers. In the struggle, Punch was shot 4 times. Judy received a long wound down her back. The officers were unharmed. The Dickin Medal was awarded to both dogs, with a citation that read, "These dogs saved the lives of 2 British officers by attacking an armed terrorist who was stealing upon them unawares, thus warning them of their danger." Punch sustained 4 bullet wounds and Judy a long graze down her back. Both dogs survived their wounds. Both lived on after the incident, cared for by the people they had protected. The word that stays with me from that citation is unawares. Their officers were sleeping. The night was quiet. Something moved in the dark that human senses missed. And 2 dogs heard it. Simon came aboard HMS Amethyst as a stowaway, smuggled onto the Royal Navy frigate by a 17-year-old sailor who tucked the tiny, malnourished kitten under his cap. He was perhaps a year old. He was thin and ragged and full of opinions. The crew adored him immediately. In April 1949, HMS Amethyst was ordered to sail up the Yangtze River in China to relieve another vessel guarding the British Embassy at Nanjing. China was in the midst of its civil war. The Amethyst was caught in crossfire between communist and nationalist forces. In the initial barrage of more than 50 direct hits, the captain was killed along with 17 other men. 27 more were wounded. Simon was blown overboard by the blast. He was eventually found in the wreckage, burned on his face and legs, his whiskers and eyebrows singed away, his small body badly shaken. The ship's doctor doubted he would survive the night. Simon survived. And then, over the 101 days that the Amethyst lay trapped on the Yangtze River, unable to move without coming under fire, Simon went to work. He hunted rats. The ship's food supplies were at risk, rats were everywhere. Simon killed them methodically and deposited them at the captain's door, a report of work completed. He visited the sick bay every day, sitting with the wounded, purring steadily beside men who were in pain and far from home. Sailors who had been through the worst of it would later say that Simon had been, in some quiet way, essential. He was promoted to able seaman. He was officially listed on the ship's company. He had his own hammock. When the Amethyst finally escaped and made its way home, a famous and celebrated run to freedom, Simon was aboard. He died in quarantine in November 1949, shortly after the ship returned to England, weakened by his injuries and the long months of the siege. He was posthumously awarded the Dickin Medal. He is the only cat ever to have received it. Simon is buried with full naval honors at the PDSA Animal Cemetery in Ilford, where his headstone reads, "In memory of Simon, served in HMS Amethyst, May 1948 to November 1949. Awarded Dickin Medal." Posthumously. Throughout the Yangtze incident, his behavior was of the highest order. Not all animal heroes received official medals. Some were recognized only by the men who served beside them, and the stories they told when they came home. Hori was a small Egyptian terrier, bright-eyed, quick, and fiercely loyal, who had been befriended by Private James Henderson of the 2nd Machine Gun Battalion, part of the 2nd Australian Imperial Force, while the battalion was stationed in the Middle East. Hori accompanied the battalion through their campaigns in the Middle East and served as an unofficial mascot, and, crucially, as a sentry. He had an uncanny ability to detect enemy aircraft before they became audible to human ears, and his sudden alertness would prompt the men to take cover minutes before the first sound of engines reached them. He was credited with saving lives. When the time came to return to Australia, James Henderson faced an impossibility. Australian quarantine law prohibited the import of animals from the Middle East. Hori would have to be left behind or put down. Henderson refused. He smuggled Hori home. Hidden in a kit bag. Hidden in a gas mask case. Hidden in pockets and pouches across thousands of miles of ocean. The small dog endured every indignity of the journey in silence, as though he understood what was at stake. They made it. Hori lived out his years in Australia, celebrated and beloved. He was the subject of a book. He was remembered in veteran reunions for decades. He received no official medal, but he received something perhaps rarer, the complete devotion of the men he had served, and the knowledge, if dogs can know such things, that he had been, without question, worth smuggling home. In the summer of 1942, a pigeon named Mercury made a flight that the British intelligence community regarded as among the most important of the war. He had been parachuted with an SOE agent into occupied Belgium. The agent had been gathering detailed intelligence on German operations, information that could not be sent by radio without risking detection. Mercury carried that intelligence home. He flew more than 400 miles, one of the longest recorded operational flights of a wartime carrier pigeon, and arrived safely. The intelligence he carried was described by those who received it as of the highest value. It included information that shaped Allied planning at a critical juncture in the war. Mercury received the Dickin Medal in August 1946. His citation acknowledged his role in carrying vital intelligence from an agent in the field, a single bird, covering the distance from Belgium to Britain, carrying in his leg canister the product of months of dangerous observation. A spy's pigeon. A long flight. A homecoming that mattered. On the island of Bougainville in the South Pacific, the jungle was so dense and the terrain so treacherous that even the radio could not always reach between positions. Supply lines were stretched. Communication was fragile. The U.S. Marines turned to dogs. The first war dog platoon arrived on the island in late 1943, with 24 dogs and their handlers. The dogs were trained as messengers, carrying notes and orders between positions that could not be reliably connected by wire or radio. In the jungle, a dog could move more quietly than a runner, navigate terrain that stopped wheeled vehicles, and maintain a route that a human messenger might not survive. One of these dogs was Caesar, a German shepherd who had been a family pet in New York before his owners donated him to the war effort when all three brothers of the Glazer family enlisted. Caesar had pined terribly when his people left. His family answered a national call for dogs of suitable size and temperament, and Caesar passed his military training with distinction. He was among the fastest messenger dogs in his platoon, moving between marine positions through the jungle like a gray shadow, carrying in his collar canister the orders and reports that kept the fighting forces coordinated. Caesar and the other dogs of Bougainville received no individual Dickin medals. The award was not extended to American military dogs in this way, but they were honored in the records of their units, and the Marines who served with them spoke of them ever after with the kind of quiet reverence that men reserve for those who have saved their lives. We have spoken of Commando, and of the SOE drops, and of Mercury. But the story of pigeons and the French resistance is larger than any individual bird. Across occupied France, in the years from 1940 to 1944, ordinary people maintained secret pigeon lofts at enormous personal risk. Keeping a carrier pigeon in occupied territory was punishable by death. The Germans knew the birds were being used for communication with Britain. They offered rewards for information about pigeon keepers. They stationed trained hawks along the coast. And still, in farmhouses and attic rooms and garden sheds, people kept pigeons. They received birds dropped by British aircraft and sent them back with intelligence. They hid lofts behind haystacks. They moved birds at night. They encoded messages in invisible ink, in code words, in the measurement of shadows. The pigeons flew north and west, across the Channel, to the lofts of Britain. Their handlers in France went back to work, mending bicycles, teaching school, tending farms, as though nothing had happened. Many were caught. Many were executed. The birds they sent flew on anyway. Not all wartime animal heroism took place on the battlefield, or in the rubble of bombed cities. Dick was a mongrel dog who served as a military guard dog with the British Army during the war, trained and deployed as a sentry and tracker animal. His particular moment of recorded heroism came when he detected something hidden along a railway line, a device that, had it not been found, would have derailed a train. The details of Dick's most celebrated act are woven somewhat with legend, as wartime stories often are. But what is documented is that he received the Dickin Medal, and that his citation acknowledged his role in detecting concealed devices during operations, saving lives through the precise application of his nose to a world invisible to his handlers. Dick is one of a number of mine and explosive detection dogs who received Dickin medals during and after the war. Their stories share a common thread: the extraordinary sensitivity of a dog's nose, capable of detecting traces of explosive chemicals at concentrations far below what any human instrument of the era could register, turned to the service of human life. A nose and a partnership. The oldest technology in the world. In the jungles of Burma, where the fighting between Allied and Japanese forces stretched across years of grueling, close-quarters combat in some of the most difficult terrain on Earth, patrol dogs played a role that has been little celebrated but was deeply valued by the men who worked with them. Dogs attached to jungle patrols could detect a human presence, smell it, hear it, sense the disturbance of air and undergrowth, at distances far greater than any human soldier. A dog at the front of a patrol moving through dense jungle could give its handler 30 seconds of warning. 30 seconds, in a jungle ambush, is an eternity. The dogs did not bark. They were trained for silence, a stiffening of the body, a shift of the ears, a subtle leaning forward that their handlers learned to read the way one reads a sentence. Those signals saved lives that no number or name can fully account for. These were the anonymous dogs, not mascots, not medal winners, but working soldiers moving through the green dark, their noses outstretched, keeping quiet faith with the men behind them. We do not know most of their names. We know what they did. In September 1944, we told in a previous volume the story of William of Orange, the pigeon who flew from the disaster at Arnhem in 4 hours and 25 minutes, carrying a message through a communications blackout that may have saved 2,000 lives. But William was not the only pigeon at Arnhem. He was simply the one who got through. Operation Market Garden was one of the most ambitious Allied airborne operations of the war. When the radios failed and the forces at Arnhem were cut off, surrounded by stronger German units, the British and Polish troops turned to every available means of communication. Pigeons were among them. Most of the pigeons sent from Arnhem did not make it. They were lost in bad weather, shot by German snipers, for the Germans knew that pigeons carried messages and had sharp-eyed men watching for them, or simply overcame by the distance and the autumn storms. William of Orange flew faster than any of them and arrived with his message intact. But behind him, in the rain, other birds flew too. We do not know their names. We do not know how far they got. We know only that they were released by men who were surrounded and running out of time, and that they rose into a grey sky and pointed their small bodies southward and west. Some things are worth doing even when the odds are against you. Along the long grinding Italian campaign, from Sicily in 1943 through the mountains and river crossings of the Italian peninsula, soldiers on both sides used dogs for a purpose that has been practiced in warfare since the First World War, locating the wounded. Red Cross dogs, trained to move between positions and find fallen men, would carry small panniers of medical supplies, morphine, bandages, water, and would return to their handlers to indicate where the wounded lay. They did not carry the injured. They found them. In the mountains, where artillery could pin down stretcher-bearers and leave a man alone in the snow for hours, a dog could get through. Low to the ground. Moving between rocks and craters. Coming to the side of a man who had been lying still, telling himself help was not coming, and placing its warm body against his. We have no names for most of these dogs. They were not individually celebrated. They worked in pairs with medics and handlers who are themselves largely unrecorded. But in the accounts of men who survived the Italian campaign, in letters home and post-war memoirs, the dogs appear again and again, a warmth in the cold, a nose in the dark, a steady panting breath that meant you had been found. And now we come to the last story of this volume. But this one has no name. For every animal whose story history preserved, whose owner wrote it down, whose commanding officer submitted a recommendation, whose moment of courage landed in a newspaper or a military record, there were hundreds, perhaps thousands, whose names were never written anywhere. The horse that stood in the rain at a field hospital for 3 days while the wounded were loaded and unloaded around it. The dog that walked the perimeter of a prison-of-war camp keeping the men company through the long Asian nights. The pigeons that were released and never came home, carrying messages into weather they could not survive. The mules that carried ammunition up mountain paths in conditions that broke equipment and sometimes men, and simply kept walking. The cats on the ships, hunting rats in darkness, sleeping in the warm proximity of sailors who needed something small and alive nearby. The stray dog that followed a column for 3 days and then was left behind at a river crossing, standing on the bank watching the soldiers go, and then turning away into whatever came next. They served. They all served. The unnamed ones as much as the celebrated. The Dickin Medal inscription reads, "For gallantry. We also serve. We also serve." It was written for them too. Let all of that settle now. You have listened well. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. The warmth of the blanket. The quiet of the room around you. The world is old and full of small, brave things. You are resting in the middle of it. Let your breathing slow. Let the images go. The dark sea, the burning stables, the jungle path, the pigeon lifting off a French field at dusk. Let them all drift. You are here. You are warm. You are safe. Sleep well.